You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 26th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing in association with Addis. Hello and a very warm welcome to The Briefing today, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak, and coming up on today's programme. Monocle's Middle East correspondent Layla Milana Allen will be joining us to discuss the latest from Gaza. As you heard a clip there, 5 journalists were among those killed in a strike on a hospital, leaving peace feeling further away than ever. From there, we'll get some business headlines with Jeff Black from Bloomberg in Zurich. We're talking France, US Federal Reserve, and why Switzerland has joined a growing number of countries suspending package deliveries to the US. After that, Monocle's foreign desk producer Anita Ryota joins us right here in the studio. Anita, the latest show that you've done for the foreign desk asks a question that might make Donald Trump squirm a bit.
Yes, as an avid listener of the Foreign Desk, I'm sure President Trump will be very curious to know what our experts have decided on if America recedes as the global hegemon, who takes over.
That Nobel Prize might have to wait a little bit. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. And we are going to start today's show with the latest from Gaza, which is reeling after yet another attack by Israel, this one on Nasser Hospital, that killed 20 people, including 5 journalists. Layla Milana Allen is Monocle's Middle East correspondent and joins me now. Layla, good to have you on the show.
Hi there.
I do wish, I have to say, Layla, that we would sometimes bring you on for some slightly more positive tidings. That is quite difficult these days when it comes to Gaza. There has been global condemnation of this latest attack that happened on Nasser Hospital. What do we know at this point about the attack itself and why it was even done by Israel?
I wish that too, Chris. And I do have to say that every time I speak about Gaza now, every time I say it, it seems impossible every day that things could be getting worse in such a horrifying situation. And yet they are. This attack that happened yesterday was on Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza, and there was a strike. There was actually a live feed of the hospital that a Reuters cameraman was running, and the feed suddenly went dead when the first strike hit. This was an artillery strike. So then journalists came to a stairway where they often go to record things that happen at the hospital, as well as medics rushing in to help. And there was then a second massive artillery strike on those medics who ran in to help. This is called a double tap strike. The idea is to try and kill as many people as possible by waiting for people to rush to the site of the first strike. Now, 5 journalists were killed. Mariam Daga, who's a photographer for the AP, the Associated Press, a Reuters cameraman, Hussam al-Masri, Muaz Abu Taha, who also worked as a freelancer for Reuters, Ahmad Abu Aziz, who worked for Middle East Eye, and Mohammed Salama. One of them was killed in the first strike. The other 4 were killed in the second strike while they were recording the news of what had happened. 15 other people were killed, dozens injured. Now, the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said that this was a tragic mishap and they're investigating it. And the IDF has said that they do not target journalists. And their intention, what they were trying to do during this strike, was to target a camera, a Hamas surveillance camera on the roof of the hospital. Now, just to be very clear, targeting a hospital in a war is a war crime. Targeting medics in a war is a war crime. Targeting journalists in a war is a war crime. There is the level of impunity international organizations and leaders that are coming back after this strike saying we have reached such a level of impunity that the idea that it could be reasonable to kill this many people and to target a hospital because of a camera is just so far beyond the bounds of what's acceptable under war that there has to be some kind of reaction now. And of course, this comes just a couple of weeks after the killing of the entire Gaza City Al Jazeera team in Gaza City just before that offensive started.
Layla, with what you say there about the reaction, the global reaction as well, this feeling that something has to change, a question also that we ask regularly, but I do wonder, is this time a little bit different? Might there be something of a different reaction from Israel given this pressure? As you said, they have said they will launch an investigation. Might that bring anything?
It's deeply unlikely. We have seen throughout this war, Israel essentially says whenever there's something that they accept might not have been done correctly, that they can investigate themselves. The idea of a party accused of breaking international law doing the investigation themselves obviously does not stand up. What we are certainly seeing, however, and we have been seeing it for weeks, first in reaction to the mass starvation of Gaza, and let us not forget that just a couple of days ago, the IPC, which is an independent international organization, came out and confirmed that there is widespread famine in Gaza, that a quarter of Gaza's population, that's 500,000 people, are now facing acute starvation, malnutrition, and risk of death. So we've obviously seen a huge international reaction to that. And now we are finally starting to see an international reaction to the targeting of journalists, to the targeting of medics, which has been going on for 2 years. The question is whether any action will be taken. We're seeing widespread statements of condemnation, but no actual action taken to pressure the IDF and the Israeli government to stop this. What we may see is coming up to the UN General Assembly in September, when, of course, we've seen multiple Western leaders say that they will now recognize a Palestinian state in an attempt to try and move forward to some sort of negotiation for a two-state solution. It's possible that there will be more pressure applied there, but many people are worried. The Committee to Protect Journalists, many other organizations that try and uphold international law during war are concerned that all we're currently seeing are statements of shock and outrage, but very little action taken. And unfortunately, as we saw with the attack on the journalists a few weeks ago, much outrage, very little actually done, and now we've seen it happen again yesterday without active steps to change the way this war is being fought, and of course, ideally, forced through a ceasefire. It's unclear whether there's going to be any change in this behavior. And just on that ceasefire, for months, the Israeli government has been saying that the ball is in Hamas's court because Hamas has been refusing to agree to the new terms that Israel has proposed. A week ago now, Hamas agreed to Israel and America's terms for a ceasefire, and there's been no response from the Israeli government as they conduct this new offensive in Gaza City. It seems deeply unlikely that they are going to agree to a ceasefire anytime soon, because rather than pulling back troops, they have renewed the conscription orders for 20,000 conscripts in the army and say they're going to issue 60,000 more. That's about an extra 50% on top of Israel's normal standing army. So we're certainly not getting any signs that they plan to wind down the war in Gaza anytime soon.
Layla Milana Allen, Monocle's Middle East correspondent, thanks very much for joining us. And now here's Tom Webb with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has accused Iran of directing at least 2 anti-Jewish attacks in his country. Albanese has given Iran's ambassador 7 days to leave the country. The ambassador was not found to have any links to the attacks. Israel's embassy in Canberra has welcomed the moves against Iran. The Trump administration has outlined plans to implement a 50% tariff on products from India. It's the latest signal that the White House plans to push ahead with the heightened levies as efforts to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine appear to be stalling. The tariff includes a 25% penalty for buying Russian oil and weapons. Korean Air is to purchase 103 next-generation Boeing aeroplanes worth over $36 billion. It follows the latest summit between President Lee Jae-myung and Donald Trump in Washington. It's the single largest aircraft order in the history of the nation's flag carrier. They are scheduled for a phased delivery around the end of 2040. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Tom. It's time now to cross over to our studio at Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich, where we are joined for a bit of a business news wrap by Jeff Black, Senior Finance Editor at Bloomberg News. Great to have you on the show, Jeff.
Nice to talk to you.
We have quite a few bits of news to get to, which our listeners will be familiar with somewhat over the last few shows or so. And we're going to start with France because it's always an interesting place. Its politics are a bit tricky at the moment, and markets are watching this week especially closely.
I think markets are watching. I'm watching. It's a little bit of a nerve-wracking situation. If you just go back to last year, you will remember that the government has already fallen after a face-off over policy. Now it's happening again. Prime Minister François Bayrou is trying to push through a pretty substantial 44 billion euros package of budget cuts and tax rises because France's public finances are going in the wrong direction. Of course, the Le Pen populist party on the right and the populist party on the left are dead against some of these pretty painful changes that he's proposing. And he has now called for a confidence vote, meaning that there's quite a good chance that the government will fall again. France's government bonds are trading lower, meaning that investors are looking for a higher interest rate to lend money to France. It's not a debt crisis, but it has some echoes of that in that the yield on French bonds is now higher than that of Greece or Portugal. And you will remember, Chris, of course, from your debt crisis times, they were the problem children of that era. France is a much bigger country, has a much bigger debt pile, and it's going in the wrong direction.
Yes, I do remember those days very well, covering them from Frankfurt with you, Jeff, there as well. And when it comes to France, though, I guess what's interesting is at the time, if you take something like Greece, you had at one point a populist government in there and markets could maybe force a change. Can markets force a change here when it is the populists on the outside that really have no interest maybe in keeping the government alive?
That is the fascinating question. Obviously, France is not the only country that has a very populist flavour to the political discourse at the moment. Obviously, the US is the primary example. The US has the advantage in that the rest of the world is quite happy to lend to it at pretty discount rates. But in other countries, we've seen that markets versus populism, it can often end up with populists losing. We saw that in the UK in 2022 when the government announced a budget that it plainly couldn't fund. And the financial markets pretty much turfed that government out of power pretty quickly. Now, this time, of course, the pieces are slightly differently arranged. But if it turns out that the current government falls or is forced into a policy back down, in other words, going easier on tax rises, going easier on budget cuts because of that populist pressure, it is pretty likely that you will see the markets respond quite sharply. And then what happens next? Somebody's got to give. The bond markets are very difficult to argue with.
Somebody's got to give, and we would see what would happen either in an election or as the government continues. But let's move on to another story, also kind of populism versus markets. But in the United States, Donald Trump has put a lot of pressure on the Federal Reserve. We did speak about this on the show yesterday when it came to the Jackson Hole Central Bankers Symposium over the weekend. And now it looks like Trump is going to put additional pressure on the Fed, in particular the governor, Lisa Cook.
So that's right. US President Donald Trump has announced that he is firing governor of the Federal Reserve, which on the face of it looks like it's within his power to do. The Federal Reserve is made up partly by presidential appointees. However, they really don't get fired very often, and their terms are very long, and they're arranged such that they are supposed to be immune from political pressure. So if Trump manages to make Lisa Cook step down, then he should be able to install someone more amenable to interest rate cuts, which is obviously what he's advocating. Even though inflation is very stubborn in the US and interest rate cuts are by no means what the economy actually needs at this moment. So Lisa Cook is looking like she's going to try and stand up to the president. And that is a pretty unprecedented situation. And then bigger questions like, okay, in authoritarian or pseudo-authoritarian system, or one which is really characterized by populism, what does the independence of a central bank actually mean? What is it worth? And over time, it looks like the evidence is it helps you keep inflation low, which is what they are supposed to do. And that is what is at stake here.
And that again brings us to the markets, because the question is whether investors might force Donald Trump's hand. Could they bring him into line here by sending some sort of warning, sending stocks lower or something else, in order to let him know that if the Federal Reserve's independence is at threat, this will be a problem for him and the economy?
Right. And we have seen that on occasion, Trump in this administration has been receptive to the warnings that financial markets do send. He put delays on some of his tariff rounds when the stock market reacted particularly badly in April. This time around, the debt market, of which the US is the world's largest, has a very particular sensitivity to how anchored inflation is, how robust the policy around inflation is. Of course, inflation is the absolute number one enemy for anybody that invests in bonds. So if they send a warning, we might see Trump backing away, but he has a habit of coming back for what he wants.
Just finally, Jeff, you did mention tariffs in there as well, and some of the market warnings that came from that. We now have a sort of different type of warning. Swiss postal services, and others for that matter in other countries, are sending their own warning, I suppose, in some ways to the United States by basically saying they won't deliver packages anymore.
It seems kind of ridiculous, and I picked this one out this morning because, I thought it was actually an interesting sign. So to recap, the Swiss Postal Service says that it was going to suspend sending packages to the US after the Trump administration suspended an exemption. It's called the de minimis exemption on small packages, merchandise that's under $800. Now, that might seem like a small matter, but there were almost 1.4 billion such packages sent to the US in 2024, $65 billion worth of trade. Of course, a very large amount of that comes from China. And I think the number one target here is fentanyl packages being sent from China to the US, which feeds into that narcotics market. What have the Swiss got to do with this? Well, it's obviously not to do with that, but it's a fairly minimal in terms of the value of the trade. But I think that it is a pretty sort of chilling signal, because these type of small commercial transactions going around the globe, eBay, Amazon, Etsy stores, this is very much a kind of characteristic of the globalization as we know it. And if you gum that up, then it's a symbol of where we are going, I think, in the global economy. It may seem small on an individual basis, but I think the signs are not great.
The lifeblood of the global economy being suspended for the moment. Jeff Black, Senior Finance Editor at Bloomberg News, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. You are back with The Briefing, and finally to the United States, or to be more exact, the countries that stand to benefit if the United States were to abdicate its role on the world stage, because that was the subject of this week's episode of The Foreign Desk. And joining me now is the producer of that very show, Anita Riota. Good afternoon, Anita.
Hello, Chris.
Tell me, pull back the curtain for us, if you will. Give us a window into your world. How did you come up with the idea for this show about the U.S. leaving the world stage?
Well, yes, Lily, Andrew, and myself will always meet on Mondays in our canteen where all the best ideas come into existence.
Such a glamorous canteen.
I mean, it kind of is. It's very chic. We were discussing how it's so central to the conversation right now, of course, how Trump is dismantling or reassembling or reinventing, however you see it, the international world order and the role that America plays in that order. But it seemed a smaller part of the conversation was how does that actually play out? If the U.S. recedes, what is the ripple effect that we see in the Baltics, in Asia, in South America, and why? How is the U.S. going to fill this new role? And we realize that it's a sort of feedback loop where the U.S. has a new myth for itself, a new vision of itself. And that is why Trump's isolationism is so popular with Americans these days. And so we really wanted to tease out, why has America's vision of itself changed? And if this big shift in the international order really comes to fruition, what is the knock-on effect for the rest of the world?
Well, and before we get to the rest of the world, if you look at the US and Trump's pulling back, as it were, how do you look at that? Because Trump himself would not necessarily say that he is abdicating his role on the world stage. He wants to have a Nobel Peace Prize and all of that. So he sees himself meddling in a different way.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I mean, on one hand, Trump's isolationism is both on the hard power front in reducing America's military presence, defense spending and military projects abroad, wanting to retreat from that side of things. But it is also a pullback on these soft power vehicles, that allow the U.S. interests abroad to be supported, whether that be global foreign aid, whether that be bringing in more foreign students to American universities. There is a plethora of ways that we see Trump just retreating from the global stage. But as you said, there seems to be a slight mentality of wanting to have your cake and eat it too, where he wants the U.S.'s global partners and rivals to be more independent, but also is not totally willing to cede America's seat at the negotiating table. And I'm sure that he likes that seat is at the head of the table.
He does want that seat at the head of the table. And when it comes to other countries and their response, of course, we focus a lot here on Europe. Is Europe stepping in to fill this void in a way that kind of goes beyond your typical talk? Are they taking actions at this point? What would that mean for the United States if Europe actually were to step up?
Now, I don't want to cannibalize our content too much because our excellent expert guests get into the heart of that exact question. But I will say, again, there is an interesting duality here, because on the one hand, our guests and officials sort of writ large will admit that there is a sense of complacency that has been engendered in Europe in the post-World War II, post-Cold War international order. But at the same time, I think that there is a lot of doom and gloom about Europe's ability to arm itself, to innovate its technology. And some of our guests actually pushed back against that more negative outlook and said Europe has the capabilities. They maybe needed a kick in the butt. And we'll see if that's really how that unfolds.
And I believe we have one clip for that to play. Can you introduce that for us?
Yes, we spoke with Edward Lucas, who is now a senior advisor at the Center for European Policy Analysis, is a long-term journalist, and he was looking at how is Europe going to respond? But primarily, he was looking at the first question I posed to you. How has America's vision of itself changed? Why is it changing in this way? So Andrew asked Edward about how the U.S. is seeing these shifting dynamics in a post-Cold War world.
The United States always feels it's done enough. And right back to the founding of NATO, the United States were worried that Europeans were enjoying security on the US taxpayer dime. And every American president since Eisenhower has complained that the Europeans aren't doing enough. But in the end, it's in America's interest to have Europe free and prosperous. It's also in America's interest to have Europe as a sort of junior ally. And that fundamental truth of power politics has overcome any American resentment or reluctance about shouldering the burden, because in the end, if you pay the piper, you call the tune. And for decades, America has paid the piper and has called the tune. That may be changing now under Trump, and I'm not sure that the Americans are completely ready for the idea of 500 million Europeans with a 20 trillion GDP making their own decisions about what they want and not necessarily playing second fiddle to the United States.
Edward Lucas there, and Anita, finally, not to cannibalize the entire show, as you said, but if it is not the US going forward playing that classic global policeman role that they've been known for, who are countries looking to instead? Is it Europe? Is it China?
Well, I'll leave you then on this teaser or cliffhanger. I'm not sure which one. Our final excellent guest, Isabel Hilton, gave us a bit of an answer into that. The leading contenders are Russia and China, but she poses the questions, is Russia capable and is China interested in the job?
Monocle's Foreign Desk producer Anita Ryota leaving us with a cliffhanger there. The Foreign Desk with Andrew Muller latest episode is out now. You can check it out on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. This is The Briefing, and that's all the time we have for this edition. It was produced by Tom Webb. Our researcher was Henry King, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons, with editing assistance from Will Charno. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Termack. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.